Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Allen. I'm chair of the President's Board of Advisors on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. I'd like to call the meeting to order and begin with the roll call. Ms. Franklin?
Right, I'm just calling last names. If you are here, please annotate you are here, and we'll keep it moving. Allen,
Here.
Baskin Glover, Abdullah, Adams Gaston, she's online. Paige Blake,
Here.
Brown Duckett, Coakley, Dees,
Here.
Goldson, Hart, Henson, Wade Hogan, Jackson, also online, Jones, Kimbrough, Moses, Paul, Ross,
Here.
Simmons, Uzel. Also present.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Franklin. I am very, very excited to again congratulate the White House initiatives. Incomparable job they've done with White House HBCU Week. As I said yesterday, it was the largest in the history of our organization, and might I add, the most comprehensive. A lot of credit goes to Dr. Dietrich Trent, Ms. Secretary Franklin, and their tremendous teams. I asked Naeem yesterday, how many staff do you actually have? And the answer was 6. That's for 1,400 that attended the conference, about 3,000 actually on Monday. And it was just a really exciting affair. We've come a long way in a very, very short amount of time. So thank you, Dr. Trent and your team. Dr. Trent, I know you weren't planning to speak today, but this is the chairman's prerogative. So I'd like you to say a few words.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Chairman Allen, for your kind words and your support, and thank you to this board. We are able to do what we do because we know we have such great supporters and advocates on behalf of HBCUs on this board, and so I just want to express our thank you to you, a great partner, and this board who have been there and championing our school, so thank you so very much.
Let's all give her another big round of applause. So to the board, we should be thrilled with President Biden and Vice President Harris's support of HBCUs. On top of the $16 billion that they had committed prior to Monday, President Biden added an additional $1.3 billion, bringing our total over $17 billion. I will remind everybody here that that's the largest investment from any administration in the history of the Republic, and we should all be proud about that. That is also in no small order a real reflection of his commitment and understanding of our work here at the White House Initiative. As you know, we issued our report to the president this time last year, almost a year ago to the date, this time last year. There were 4 priorities. There are 4 priorities, I should say. Physical and technological infrastructure, research, connected and career pathways, and HBCU preservation and growth. I can tell you that many of the recommendations outlined in our report reflect the investments the president has made, so we should be very proud of that as well. We have continued work to do yet, so we are not planting any flags. And for fear of being too political, the next piece of work is November 5th. And then after that, we should continue our work together. One of the things we want to get done today is go over our recommendations and talk about where we might focus our attention over the next year. We're pleased to have the McKinsey company with us to help us through that process. We also plan to hear from the Undersecretary, our good friend James Kvaal, who'll give us some updates from the United States Department of Education. Naeem Nixon, who will spend some time updating from the White House Initiative, and Dr. Leslie Baskerville from NAFIO, who will talk to us a little bit about advocacy within the HBCU network. We won't have any comments on HBCU voting rights this time. We'll hold that for another time. And then we will spend time taking public comment. I expect it to be a very good but efficient meeting. So please act accordingly. And we'll start from here. So you have the minutes in front of you from the April 18th meeting. I should just add that that meeting was held at the Alabama State University, where the president is Dr. Quentin Ross. And it was a high time. It was really a high time. We got a lot of work done for sure. But Dr. Ross, your students, your facilities were indicative of what a quality HBCU should look like. And I think you all know that there's a lot of history in Montgomery, and a lot of that starts with his leadership. So you have the minutes before you. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any unreadiness? So ordered. All right, we will turn it over to the Undersecretary, Dr. Kvaal.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, and thank you for having me here in person. I know we had some technical difficulties in the past, so I appreciate being able to be here with all of you. This week is my third anniversary as Undersecretary, and in thinking back to my time at the department, I was remembering a couple of trips I took in my first months in office. And the first was meeting with a group of students who were prevailing through the pandemic thanks to an extraordinarily strong community at their school. And the second was to help cut the ribbon on a new school of graduate adult and continuing studies. And this was at a time when some wondered whether the pandemic would be a permanent blow to HBCUs, and this one was soaring to new heights. So these two visits to Tennessee State University, led by Dr. Glover, and to Delaware State, led by Dr. Allen, were really an inspiration for me as I was trying to find myself in the first weeks on my new job. So thank you for your leadership, not just your service to your universities, but also on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration and HBCU students across the country. And I also want to say thank you to Deidre Trent and her hardworking team for all the immense effort that went into a highly successful conference this year, and for fighting for HBCUs day in and day out. So thank you, Deidre. You know, it's a big deal when the president and the secretary show up, and to President Biden, HBCUs are a big deal. And that is about standing up to past injustices that have denied HBCUs and their students a level playing field. And it's about supporting the institutions that are committed to equity and upward mobility and creating opportunities for people who otherwise wouldn't have them. Those are questions of national urgency, and we couldn't address those problems without HBCUs. So one way that we're doing that is through college affordability. And President Biden and Vice President Harris have increased Pell Grants by $900 a student, the largest increases in more than a decade. They've also proposed doubling Pell Grants, making community colleges tuition-free, creating $30 billion in scholarships at HBCUs and other MSIs. These are some of the best investments we could make. And we need the help of Congress and states to move forward on those. Until they do, student loans will continue to be one of the primary ways that students finance higher education in this country. And making those loans more affordable has been a central project of this administration. There are 43 million Americans with student loans. The vast majority are not Ivy League graduates. We're talking about working people, teachers, nurses, first responders, small business owners, and these days even blue-collar workers like truck drivers and hairstylists often have student debt. These debts make it harder to buy a home, start a business, save for retirement. So it's not just 43 million people that are struggling with these debts, but it's their families, it's their communities, it's the economy. And it's not all dollars and cents either. The students that I meet want to pay it forward. They're not just looking for a job, they're looking to make the world a better place. At North Carolina A&T, I met young men and women who wanted to find better ways to teach young people math and to overcome adversity in their lives. At Tennessee State, I met a young mother of two who was earning her bachelor's degree in health science while also working at a local high school. She wanted to become a special education teacher. So when we ask these young people to pay for their own educations with debt, we're also telling them that the purpose of that education is to get a financial return so that they can repay those loans. But we know that higher education is about a lot more than that. And when young people say they can't afford to go to college, or if they do, they need to take a high-paying job, that's something that is a loss for all of us. So I want to update you on our progress to address those kinds of unaffordable debts. First, we've worked hard to fix the broken debt relief programs like Public Service Loan Forgiveness, or PSLF. When President Biden took office, only 7,000 people had ever qualified. Many spent years repaying their loans, working in public service jobs, but they had the wrong type of loan. They enrolled in the wrong repayment plan. They hadn't filed the right form at the right time, and years went by and it was too late. And the department said to them they just had to keep paying. We've now fixed a lot of those problems. We've recognized that service, and we've forgiven the debts of almost 1 million public servants. We've also fixed broken debt relief programs for borrowers with disabilities, for people who were cheated by for-profit colleges, and others who earn relief. It's a total of almost $170 billion for nearly 5 million borrowers. Now, President Biden and Vice President Harris are pursuing even greater debt relief, and we've proposed help for borrowers who owe more than they borrowed because interest runs up faster than they can pay it down. We've proposed help for people who've been making payments on their loans for 20 or 25 years or longer and still owe. We've proposed help for people who are experiencing financial hardship. Those plans could help 1 million more borrowers this fall, and we are almost ready to go with them, but they're now being challenged in court. So we'll see how those court arguments go in the coming weeks. President Biden has also created the SAVE plan, which is the most affordable repayment plan ever. And under the SAVE plan, if you earn less than about $15 an hour or more if you have a family, then you don't owe anything. And if you make whatever payment you owe, we forgive the extra interest, so your balance doesn't keep growing. The SAVE plan is also undergoing litigation, and I'll say that I believe strongly we have the authority to create these kinds of repayment plans. We've done it 3 times before, going back 30 years, and we'll keep fighting these in court. The bottom line is there's a lot that the Biden-Harris administration has done. There are other places where we do need help from Congress or the courts. But I think there's a vision here that the president's policies have articulated, and that's for people going into public service or other careers that matter to us as a country. Let's make sure they get public service loan forgiveness or the other help they need so we aren't financing that on the back of unaffordable debts. If students went to a for-profit college, let's close those programs down and get students better choices. And if students are relying particularly heavily on debt due to economic or racial disparities, let's not load on more debt. Let's invest in Pell Grants or other scholarships because that's the right way to level the playing field. Student loans are not. Speaking of Pell Grants, I do want to talk about the FAFSA for a moment. I know we've talked about this at past meetings. The delays and errors in FAFSA processing this year were frustrating for students and families. And I know it was a lot of extra work on college campuses as well. And in some cases, colleges are still working on financial aid offers that in a typical year would have been done months ago. So to everyone involved in those efforts, I want to say thank you for the extraordinary efforts this year. I know it hasn't been easy. And through this process, we've done our best to support institutions, including HBCUs. Dr. Trent hosted regular webinars with FSA experts. We provided extra staff and technical assistance and training to 60 HBCUs. And over the course of the summer, we partnered with a dozen HBCUs as well as college counselors and community groups across the country to help 750,000 students submit a FAFSA. So with the help of our partners, we've now closed the gap on last year's FAFSA submissions, which was at one point 30 or 40%. It's now down to about 2%. And we've actually identified about 500,000 more students who are eligible for Pell Grants than we had at this point last year. That said, I know we're not through the woods. We need to help campuses get through this year, and we need to make sure these problems are not repeated next year. We've added staff at FSA and contractors, including new leadership, and created cleaner lines of authority and accountability. We're already testing the 2025-26 FAFSA. Starting October 1, in just a couple of weeks, we'll begin testing it with real students. And by December 1, we'll make it available for everyone. So again, I know this hasn't been easy, and I just want to say one more time, thank you to everyone who went the extra mile this year to help students get the aid that they're entitled to. All of this work on affordability is really critical, but it's not enough alone. We also have to make sure our campuses are open to everyone and welcoming to everyone. And that's an aspect of student success that's critical. Like many of you, I was appalled by the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action last summer, which not only rolled back decades of progress on college opportunity, but it turned its back on some of our country's greatest strengths, including our diversity and our commitment to work toward equity. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated example. Yesterday, the House of Representatives voted on the End Woke in Higher Education Act, which would micromanage both public and private universities and undermine their ability to recognize and promote diversity. Some political candidates want to use accreditation as a lever to close DEI offices, as if, as Secretary Cardona has said, diversity, equity, inclusion are bad words, and division, inequity, and exclusion are the good ones. These efforts are damaging in and of themselves, but they also have a larger goal of casting a shadow on our work. They seek to create a chilling effect that discourages the idea of working toward equity. So it's important that we not be discouraged or disillusioned. We have to renew our commitment to opportunity. We have to tell all of our young people that they belong on college campuses. And we have to bring new urgency to our work of building a better country. The truth is, our nation can't compete in the 21st century without all of its citizens. And we can't live up to our ideals as a nation until everyone has that same opportunity. Too often in our country, we focus on a handful of colleges and universities that are the oldest, that have the largest endowments, that are hard to get into. But our country also needs universities that welcome all students, that are affordable, that serve equity. And historically, Black colleges and universities are unique in that they were explicitly founded in the pursuit of racial equity and reflect that mission in their leadership, their budget, their student bodies, their new initiatives, every facet of their work. So it's not surprising that HBCUs punch above their weight in supporting students that were not considered by other institutions that might have higher US News rankings. In fact, according to the UNCF, they boost up 5 times more students than the entire Ivy League. And now more than ever, as students are looking at decisions being made by the Supreme Court and others, they are turning to HBCUs to welcome them with open arms. So I'm proud to be part of an administration that is fighting for Pell Grants, which help 3 out of 4 HBCU students. I'm proud to be part of an administration that has challenged states on unfair funding for the land grant HBCUs. I'm proud to be part of an administration that has funded $17 billion for HBCUs so far. And I know this work is not easy. When I'm discouraged, I think about some of the students I met, including students at Morgan State, who are literally building a rocket ship to go up into outer space. So let's be inspired by our students' optimism and determination. Let's rise to their example. And as Secretary Cardona suggests, let's build colleges and universities defined by the word possibilities. So thank you to all of you for your advice and support on this project. I know how important your work is to the President and to Secretary Cardona, and we wouldn't be here without your partnership. So thank you. And Dr. Allen, do we have time for a little discussion?
We do.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Dr. Kvaal. Questions from the Board of Advisors? Before we get into those questions, though, I do want you to comment a bit, Mr. Secretary, on the public service loan forgiveness program, the parameters. We have many folks in the room that probably need to know those parameters and could get that out to their various communities.
I would be very grateful for efforts to publicize public service loan forgiveness. And so the idea is that you need to be employed in a public service job, which generally speaking is a governmental entity at any level, or many nonprofits, not all nonprofits, but nonprofit colleges and universities do qualify. And you need to be working and making payments for 10 years, and at the end of those 10 years, whatever is left over is forgiven. Most students enroll in an income-driven repayment plan, which lowers their monthly payments as they're working toward forgiveness. And while we are closing in on 1 million students, we also know there are a lot more out there who haven't applied. And we do not know which of our borrowers are employed in public service jobs. They have to apply.
Does it have to be 10 consecutive years
It
employed?
does not have to be consecutive.
Okay.
No. And so I think whatever can be done to make it as easy as possible for employees with student loans to submit those employment certification firms, I'd be grateful.
Great, thank you. Questions from the board? Yes, Mr. Moses.
Not a question, but just a thank you about the public service loan forgiveness, because we work with nonprofit organizations, and I've had several colleagues who've benefited from this. They've gotten tens of thousands of dollars forgiven. And in fact, we had a grantee who said in a public meeting that she had seen $240,000 in student loans forgiven. So this makes a huge difference to the people who every day are working in government offices, who are working at nonprofit organizations and colleges to try to make this a better place. And removing that burden has completely changed their life. So thank you.
Ms. Franklin, any advisors on the phone that would like to ask a question? Can you talk a little bit about the beta testing for FAFSA and how any HBCUs could be a part of that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So, compared to where we were a year ago, we're in a fundamentally different place. And implementing the new FAFSA with the data sharing with the IRS required modernizing systems that in some cases were 50 years old, written in COBOL, and just weren't capable for meeting IRS standards for security and privacy. So we now have that foundation to build on. We also made a decision to essentially copy and paste last year's application and run a standalone application for this year, which means it doesn't have all of the functionality that you might want for a renewal FAFSA. You're going to have to type your address in again. but dramatically simplified the amount of work we had to do and the potential new bugs that work would introduce. So we've completed that process. We have a FAFSA for next year that has been up and running for 3 or 4 weeks now. We are moving through our internal testing. And then on October 1, we're going to start testing with small groups of individual students, and then we will test with progressively larger groups as we lead up to launch on December 1. So these are real FAFSAs. Students will get real aid eligibility. Your financial aid offices will get ICERs. And even if you're not a participant, we will send an ICER to every school listed by one of these students. So even if you're not a participant, you might get an ICER or two showing up. We would really appreciate some participation from the HBCU community. And if you're interested, maybe the best thing to do would be to let Dr. Trent know, and she can connect you with the right folks at FSA.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any additional questions or comments? Dr. Ross? Dr. Ross, are you there?
There we go.
Dr. Ross, you may proceed.
Speaking, but we can't.
Dr. Ross, perhaps you could text your question to Ms. Franklin or myself. And as he's doing that, Mr. Secretary, can you spend some time on what the Department of Education's future priorities will be moving forward here?
I think you can expect to see the same values going forward. We have a lot more work to do on student debt and the implementation. You know, there's a lot of grand policy promises. I think there's a lot of implementation work to do that will take a lot of time to reach everyone. I think you're going to continue to see a lot of emphasis on the colleges and universities that are committed to a different vision of excellence, one that's about inclusivity and helping all students succeed and supporting their local economies. Of course, we're going to keep working on the FAFSA until we've accomplished what we set out to achieve there.
Ms. Franklin, do you have Dr. Ross's question?
He's muted now.
I'm honestly relieved that I'm not the only one with technical difficulties.
So, Mr. Chair, while we're trying to get Dr. Ross on the line, I do want to just mention Undersecretary Kvaal has been an incredible partner with us. Every quarter we meet with TMCF, UNCF, and NAFIO, and he provides them with an update and get recommendations on how we can be better partners for them. So we owe him a debt of gratitude because he's just been a great partner for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And one more question for the audience, Mr. Secretary. Could you talk a little bit about the framework for the rulings we've seen against debt forgiveness and what the courts are saying specifically as to why they find it unlawful?
Yeah. So the Supreme Court decision a year ago was based on the president's original plan to provide up to $20,000 in debt relief to low and middle income borrowers. And that authority, that action was taken based on emergency authority related to the pandemic. And the court ruled that there was a major questions doctrine, or essentially that an action that expensive though it might be consistent with the plain text of the statute, needed some stronger or more explicit authorization from Congress. And so we did not necessarily agree with that decision, but we did, of course, respect it. And we have been developing a new set of debt relief that are based in legal authority. This time it's based in our ability to settle or compromise debts. And we have identified borrowers who are experiencing particular hardships that are addressed in other ways through the Higher Education Act. So, for example, borrowers who owe more than they borrowed because of interest, we've addressed that prospectively in a lot of ways through our new repayment plan. But there's still some 25 million people out there that have balances larger than they borrowed. And if that stat alone doesn't tell you there's something wrong with the student loan program. We also have these plans that say, once you've paid for 20 or 25 years, the rest is forgiven because student loans aren't intended to be a life sentence. But we still have people who have loans on the books who've been paying since, the 80s. So I think the question before the courts now, this again is quite expensive. It is a different legal authority. It is more targeted. It is grounded in the purposes of the Higher Education Act, but I think the courts are again wondering, just simply because of its cost, does it exceed our legal authority? And similarly with the SAVE plan, even though that we have created repayment plans many times in the past, this plan is generous, and I think the court is applying the same tests that it created in Nebraska to the SAVE plan as well. So so we'll see. I mean, I think the courts are a little less predictable maybe than they were in the past, and we seem to be sort of on the cutting edge of a rethinking of administrative law and how the Supreme Court allows agencies to interpret their statutes. So we'll see how that all plays out.
Less predictable is certainly a description. Do we have Dr. Ross, Ms. Franklin?
We'll go with Dr. Ross next.
Okay, Dr. Ross?
And if you'll just unmute.
You hear me? I placed my questions in the chat. There's statements in the chat.
Okay. Dr. Ross. His statements include the following. Thank the department, the White House Initiative, TMCF, and UNCF for the technical assistance during the FAFSA upgrade. During financial aid audits of institutions, will deference be given to
Deference, yeah.
will deference be given to do the mishaps with the upgrade of the system?
So we have we've announced a bunch of administrative flexibilities for colleges through this year, including treatment of errors that were made on the FAFSA. We have postponed some of the routine compliance activities like program reviews and those kinds of things. We've postponed some of the new regulatory requirements this administration has created. So, we certainly understand the very difficult circumstances that colleges have been through this year and all the work that they've done in a compressed timeline. So I want to be a little bit careful about what I say here, but I think we certainly understand the circumstances that schools are in and are doing everything we can to be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your leadership, for your continued partnership, and we welcome your participation in the rest of today's meeting.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have updates from the White House Initiative from Naeem Jenkins Nixon. Naeem?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going to wait for the slides here, but for background, in September of 2023, Secretary Cardona and Secretary Vilsack sent a letter to 16 states regarding unbalanced funding at their 1890 land grant institutions. This is an update on progress we've seen and some next steps. In addition to that, just a brief recap for those who are unaware. The Office of the Chief Economist estimated that between 1987 and 2020, HBCU land grant institutions received $15 billion less than from their state than they would have than their counterparts. This data was analyzed from the NCES IPED system, and it included total state funding appropriations plus grants and contracts, total annual enrollment, and state funding per student. The thing that I always like to highlight here is that this includes, as I mentioned, total appropriations in states and grants. This isn't just about the one-to-one match. So typically when we talk about land grant institutions and underfunding, folks will go to the one-to-one match for their point of reference. This is total appropriations. Since the letter was released, we've had engagement from 8 states that included Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Virginia, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and North Carolina. Of that engagement, states that requested either more information or meetings with our office included Alabama, Louisiana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. We hosted workshops with those states, provide them with additional information. And in addition to that, we also presented before the U.S. House Ranking Member, Bobby Scott. We presented before the National Black Caucus of State Legislators and amongst various HBCU alumni associations. We can go to slide 5. One more slide. Since the letter was released, the Department of Agriculture reviewed their authority. What they found was that they don't have the statutory authority to require a match, although they strongly encourage it. They only have the authority to waive the match. In June, we co-hosted a meeting with the offices of each of the state's governors, their SHIELs, state legislators, the 1890 institutions, and their staff, providing them with a background on how the data was collected, the methodology for the calculation, and then finally USDA's role in all of this. In addition to that, we've seen progress from several states since the letter's been released. We've seen Arkansas increase funding to their 1890 land grant. In Maryland, the governor proposed 2-to-1 state to federal match for their land grant, which was a recommendation in the letter. West Virginia allocated $50 million to build a lab at their 1890 land grant. And then just 2 weeks ago to the day, Langston University for the first time received 100% of their match in their history. Next slide. Our goal is currently we have a follow-up letter that is going through the clearance process. In this letter, we want to restate the unbalanced funding total just to make sure folks are completely aware of it. We do want to acknowledge the states that have made steps towards addressing the problem, lifting them up. And then we also want to recommend that states follow the steps that the state of Tennessee took prior to the letter coming out. So in Tennessee, State Representative Harold Love led a bipartisan joint committee that delved into their state's historical funding records. That's important because our data only goes back to 1987. Tennessee was able to go back to the 1950s. I'm sure other states will be able to go back to prior time as well to get the total picture of what that underfunding looks like. In addition to that, We are also going to include language for several unique circumstances. In Alabama, there are two 1890 land grants, Alabama A&M and Tuskegee University. Our initial data only covered public land grant institutions. Tuskegee University is a private land grant. Alabama also has some very unique language regarding how Tuskegee is funded. So recommending that when Alabama goes to look at Alabama A&M and their funding, they also rectify and begin working on Tuskegee as well. In addition to that, Ohio Central State recently received its land grant status. So Ohio also looking at how their funding is calculated as well for their institution. And then based on our data from 1987 to 2020, Delaware State University did receive appropriate funds. However, again, our data only goes back to 1987, and we need to look at before that period of time. So our letter will include a recommendation for that state to look at its historical data. I will pause there for any questions or comments.
Any questions for Mr. Nixon? Ms. Franklin, any questions on the phone or comments? Okay. Mr. Nixon, first of all, thank you for your good work here. I think everybody knows that the initial concern was, I believe, $12 billion in total in deficiencies throughout the HBCU network. I think the follow-up steps have been noteworthy, and hopefully you continue to keep us posted and update us here on the status as we move forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next, we're going to have McKinsey come before us for the audience. The McKinsey company has been providing significant pro bono work through their Institute for Black Economic Mobility to this body. So they've been with us now for about a year and a half, helped us with respect to formulating our recommendations by facilitating a process that we believe was of the highest order. We've been working specifically with Ryan Golden from McKinsey, who is here with us today. After our last meeting, I asked her to take a look at the recommendations we put before the president, what the progress has been with respect to those recommendations, and then where we might focus our attention in the upcoming year for later reports to the president. So with that, I'll turn over to Ms. Golden.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate that introduction and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. If it's okay, if we could just go back one page. Oh, okay, well, so it's fine. We can go to the next page. What we put together a short document, and what we wanted to do is a few things. The first is reorient around these 4 strategic pillars that the PBA established and set last year that went forth in the report. And then, as Chairman Allen said, look at a bit of the progress, and in particular, some of the funding priorities that have been established against the pillars. And what we'll see is that quite a bit of it actually dovetails very nicely with the opportunities that the PBA identified through our work together. And then we want to shift and really spend a bit of time having dialogue with this group around what some of the go-forward priorities can look like across these pillars. So that's the plan for, call it, the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Just as a reminder for the pillars in front of us today, preservation and growth, infrastructure, student supports, connected pathways, and research. As we think about the recommendations in the report that were just referenced, preservation and growth really entailed a few things, and I'll hit the highlights. The first was around the capital finance program, and what the PBA said there is that we wanted to, one, increase funding through that program, but then also increase the use of the funding that is allocated for that through that program as well. And so that was one thing. The other thing was, how do you think about increasing endowments, thinking about the endowments and their usage of interest on those dollars as well, and increasing revenues for institutions overall. And so we looked at all of those areas, and you all put forth recommendations and particular activities and actions that could help grow institutions within that pillar. The second one is infrastructure, and beyond physical technology and energy, we also looked at cybersecurity infrastructure as well. Through student supports and pathways, the first and I think the cornerstone of that was, how do we increase the funding of Pell Grants, which is exciting, and we heard Under Secretary Kvaal talk about the progress that has been made there. In addition, there was a lot of discussion and energy around how do we actually increase finances and increase resources that are allocated to institutions for student support services. And that is pathways that are the partnerships with industry, partnerships with government, and otherwise to help with internships and other practical experiences for students. And the last linchpin of this one that was really important that we talked about were mental support services for students as well. And then around research, federal research dollars, and we looked not only at increasing federal research flow to institutions, but also how do we increase the number of agencies that are allocating funds to HBCUs. And so that's one thing. And then the last was increasing capabilities and capacity building to help enable more research as well. We can go to the next page. Thank you. So the next kind of section of this is we've broken out each of the pillars that I just walked us through. And we actually, if we go on to the next one in front of us, just took a look at some of the recent announcements around funding for HBCUs, just to see where everything falls. And I think what is very encouraging is all of the opportunities that the PBA has identified and the recommendations that were put forth to the president are really very well represented. And we won't walk through all of these, but a few that we'll call out is, if we look at preservation and growth, you see the additional capital finance debt relief that was granted. Through preservation and growth, we also talk quite a bit about enhancing and expanding much of the STEM programming on campus. And so there is significant funding there as well. And overall, just funding to help with financial sustainability. Similarly, for infrastructure, we took a kind of a broad lens and said, let's not just look at the physical piece, but also how do we think about, as I said, cybersecurity? And we see that reflected as well. Lots of technology support, plant maintenance support as well. So that's all represented there. And if we go on to the next page, really a similar story for student supports. And so we see lots of grants there. Similarly, we talked about the increase in Pell Grant earlier today. And along research, an expansion of many of the agencies that are granting funds and resources to institutions, and also an expansion of the partnerships that are existing today to help improve and enable research pathways. So if we go to the next page, what we thought is that we would actually do a bit of a deep dive into one of the pillars, and we selected preservation and growth. But I'll ask my colleague, Ogechi Onyeka, to really talk us through a bit of some detail around some of the expanded programs and services that we've seen in preservation and growth.
Thank you so much, Ryan. My name is Ogechi Onyeka. Very excited to be here to give a little bit of insight into specific examples of HBCUs activating these dollars and funds that Ryan was just talking about. So if we look at preservation and growth, we wanted to call out the American Rescue Plan, which has awarded around $4 billion to meet student needs and enhance operations across campuses. Two specific examples of HBCUs activating these funds. We start with the first one on Alabama HBCUs. We have seen about $334 million being awarded to HBCUs throughout Alabama. And this is aimed at supporting student services, infrastructure improvements, and just preserving overall academic programs. Another example is with Virginia State University. This university has gotten around $800,000 from the U.S. Department of Defense with a specific focus on enhancing STEM capabilities around emerging technologies like generative AI, industrial cybersecurity, and cyber defense. If we go to the next slide, we wanted to give a little bit more detail on how Alabama HBCUs are using the $334 million from the American Rescue Plan. So if you look in the middle of what is being displayed, you will see that these HBCUs have gotten funding ranging from $9 million to around $60 million for Alabama A&M University. And on towards the right, for the most right of the page, you will see some of the outcomes that are already showing up from these funds being activated at these universities. Specifically, these colleges have awarded direct supports to students at risk of dropping out, thus increasing retention and completion of students at these HBCUs. Many of these colleges also were able to keep student prices the same as they were pre-pandemic by leveraging some of these funds. And finally, some of this funding has also gone towards preserving continuous employment for at-risk staff. So we're seeing employees who otherwise would have been at risk of losing their jobs, getting to keep their jobs as a result of this funding. We can move on to the next slide, please.
Just one thing, though, when we put this page together, we did it knowing that we had the presidents of Talladega and of Alabama State on the board. So if there's anything that you two would like to add to that, we would obviously welcome your thoughts here.
That's no excuse, Dr. Kimball.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay. So in line with some of those examples that we've just seen, we also wanted to share that there are some more funding opportunities that are still aligned with the PBA's pillars that are upcoming where HBCUs can apply for that funding and still receive the funding to further some of these opportunities. So as a quick reminder, throughout the course of this committee, there have been a couple of opportunities that have been identified across the pillars. We don't have to go through each one, but we wanted to highlight areas where we are seeing some upcoming funding that universities, HBCUs, can leverage to pursue some of these initiatives.
Ogechi, feel free to go through.
Oh, okay. So some of the opportunities that we identified previously ranged from the near term to the long term, and they were across those 4 pillars that we have been talking about. On the near-term front, we had talked about increasing state appropriations to HBCUs for further preservation and growth of HBCUs. We talked about, on the infrastructure front, increasing public funding for infrastructure on campuses, for example, broadband infrastructure. We have spent a considerable amount of time, again, just talking about how Pell Grant regulations have been reformed in the near term to enable student supports. And finally, on the research front, we have talked about how funding can be allocated to help HBCUs increase their capacity with regards to emerging research topics that would be beneficial for HBCUs in the near term. And then going further along the timeline, we have also identified some midterm opportunities that could be improved upon in the next couple of years, ranging from diversified use cases of the HBCU capital financing programs, for example, through additional M&A opportunities for HBCUs. In the near term, along the infrastructure lens, we've also talked about increasing capital appropriations to physical infrastructure at HBCUs, and this is where we're beginning to see some momentum in the midterm as well. There is also initiatives regarding increasing access to career coaching and student advising support for college students at HBCUs, which will enable progress around the student support lens in the midterm. And finally, on the research front, a lot of funding on increasing research funding for HBCUs, specifically from federal agencies, state governments, and other private organizations.
Just a couple other things to add. You may all recall that when we went through this exercise, you had thought about things as what are near-term opportunities, what are things that are more catalytic, and what are things that are over the longer term could be strategic. And so the idea was that hopefully over the next year, which now we think we're a year out from when the recommendation was initially served, we could actually look down that column of near term and perhaps even into the catalytic and midterm and start to see several of those things actually actioned and implemented at institutions. So we'll come back to that page as we have the discussion around where is it that you want to focus your energy and efforts over the next year or so. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please. So in line with some of those initiatives, we wanted to share some upcoming funding opportunities that we are seeing already available with near-term deadlines that HBCUs can leverage to further these initiatives on their campuses. So to call out three of the most eminent ones, the first is the Enhancing Biomedical Engineering, Imaging, and Technological Acceleration at HBCUs. This grant has a deadline of September 30th, so really coming up at the end of the month here, and we'll see up to $300,000 being awarded per institutions to prepare students for careers in the biomedical engineering fields. The second grant we wanted to call out that could be interesting for HBCUs to apply for is the Capacity Building for HBCUs, Archives and Technology Acceleration at HBCUs. This grant has a deadline of November 7th and could see institutions get up to $250 each to help with training staff and acquiring necessary equipment for improving archives on campuses. And then the final grant we wanted to help call attention to is the Minority Serving Institutions Partnership Program Consortia Grant. This grant could award up to $5 million per institution with rolling deadlines until July of 2026. But this grant is focused on improving and expanding technology knowledge and preparing students for career fields and pathways in cybersecurity and other technologically related careers. Okay, we can go on to the next section, please.
All right. So as we wrap up, if you don't mind moving us to our final page here, we just wanted to do two things. I think the other just parallel we wanted to draw is just between the synergy of the sessions that took place over this week on the left-hand side and their alignment within the pillars, but more broadly, open up to the group here just to ask, you know, how are you thinking about the progress that has been made over the pillars? And as you think about these next several months and over the next year, where are additional areas beyond some of the opportunities that we just walked through that you think warrant attention? Or are there just opportunities that you think, you know, maybe effort should be doubled down in? So I'll pause there.
And thank you, Ryan. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the advisors. And remember, colleagues, let's just think through what we've already recommended to the president and where we believe we should double down.
Yeah, and it might be helpful then if we just go back a few pages and we can see some of the opportunities in front of us. I think it's 3 pages back, 2 pages back. One more. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open up for discussion. Dr. Kimbrough.
One is really just a procedural question, since we're really supposed to have a report every year. Are we going to be able to take this information and turn it into our report for this year? Because I think we should.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That was the second thing that I'm continuing to think about is how do we provide some specific support for small private institutions? Because even though there has been some tremendous gains and excitement, particularly with state-funded institutions, and they're seeing some record enrollments, a lot of the small privates are struggling almost in silence. I'm acutely aware of that in the situation that I find myself in now, as an interim in a place that has really got some major challenges. So I'm just trying to think, a lot of the ideas that we have listed right now, I can't do any of that. I've got to be able to do some basic blocking and tackling well. And I don't know what exactly that looks like. I'm still thinking through it. But I think going forward, there's going to have to be some specific attention to some of those small privates, which I think, quite frankly, might not make it. So I just want to put that on the table, that we've got to be able to carve that out, because they're not in a position to do many of the things that we look at doing that I think should be done as well. But I think there's got to be a special lane for us to provide some attention to a very vulnerable part of this sector.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Very good comment, Dr. Kimber. The one thing I might say that we should pay some special attention to is the HBCU capital financing program from this perspective. They are able, and Dr. Ross serves on that board, they are able to provide support for what you might otherwise call consolidations and acquisitions. And while we don't talk about that as much, one of my core points is if a small institution is struggling, the actual HBCU contiguous to it that might be more strong should be the first to help. And a lot of that can come from support that is garnered from the HBCU capital financing program. Does it look like a full consolidation? Maybe. Does it look like some support, some mutual support? Probably. And we should do a little bit more digging on that as we move forward. Dr. Franklin.
I have Dr. Wade Hogan, and I'm sorry, let's start with Dr. Adams Gaston, followed by Dr. Wade Hogan.
Dr. Adams Gatson.
Let's see.
You know, for those on the phone, Ms. Franklin, why don't we have them put their questions in the chat?
Okay.
Okay. All right, any other comments or feedback? Mr. Moses. Mr. Moses, turn your mic on.
One question is or two questions. One on the infrastructure. Is there any possibility of tapping into some of the IRA work on green infrastructure, green buildings, that might be something that, especially sort of in the midterm, that HBCUs could tap into to make their buildings more energy efficient, which obviously upgrades them, but also maybe reduces general operating costs? And then on the student supports, is there any way to look into how maybe SNAP benefits could be tapped into? Because I think about, you've got Pell Grants, you might have state assistance, and if you had SNAP, you're really creating a really useful set of supports, particularly for the lowest income students. And then also whether there might be support on things, maybe also in the IRA with transit. Doesn't work with every institution, but there may be institutions in suburban areas or metropolitan areas where they don't have easy access to transit, but as they expand transit with the IRA, to make sure that HBCUs aren't left off.
Yep. Okay, thank you for that. And actually, I remember our working sessions and the energy discussions that we had. We took all those down. So I think that as we're preparing the next iteration of this, we'll go deep on that.
Dr. Golson.
Yes, thank you. I would like for us to focus on the public funding for expanding broadband. There is no reason why we should not be further along than we are. And we need to add an additional focus around the use of AI and how to integrate that into the university workspace.
Thank you.
Dr. Coakley.
Thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues for also nailing two things that I was definitely thinking about as well. Access to transportation, as well as the use of AI, I think were big things. We had a great AI discussion yesterday. There is an opportunity that as we are thinking about AI and adding new technologies, or even some of the green space technologies, because remember, people are sustainable resources as well. That's a great place to make sure that we're also still thinking critically about access and inclusion. Access, especially as we are thinking about new technologies like AI, making sure those resources are accessible, not just for HBCU students with disabilities, but for HBCU staff with disabilities. And there is also a really exciting opportunity there to just sort of continue to give some good tools, resources, and case studies that would work very well for smaller HBCUs who might be struggling with, okay, let's say I get infrastructure dollars. What do I prioritize? What do I do first? You know, do I fix my HVAC or do I ramp my student union building? So really helping make sure that we're creating good resources and that doesn't get lost in our discussion about capital gains, infrastructure, and new technology.
Thank you, Dr. Copeland. Ms. Franklin, any questions in the chat now?
A comment in the chat from Dr. Ross. Thank you for your report. Funding given by the Biden-Harris administration allows us to enhance endowment, student support, employee preservation, et cetera.
Okay, any additional?
Others?
Yep.
I think Dr. Hogan is typing in the chat, and we'll come back to her.
Okay. Anybody else in the room? Ms. Blake or Mr. Deese? Okay. Okay. We'll wait for the typing to cease. So while that's happening, Ms. Golden, if you could talk a little bit about the Institute for Black Economic Mobility for the room and their work with HBCUs and the Black community in general, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So in the wake of George Floyd's murder, McKinsey and Company, we essentially established these 10 actions to advance racial equity. And one of them was the standing up of an institute that was focused and dedicated to understanding what are the opportunities available to equity, to racial equity, and in particular in the private sector and the public sector in improving Black lives, but also its impact on GDP and otherwise. And so that's a bit of how the Institute was started. Through the Institute, we actually look at things across the spectrum. And so education is obviously one area we focus on. We know that education is core to enabling social mobility. But we also look at the Black consumer, for instance, and we want to understand what are habits of the Black consumer, what are habits of Black investors, for instance. I think one of the things we found, we had always heard Black people don't spend responsibly, right? We have a lot of debt. Turns out when we did the research, that's not true, actually. Black people are more conservative with their money, right? So we're trying to understand those patterns, and also what are the opportunities for business? What are the opportunities for government? What are the opportunities for the social sector? It is our belief that it's actually not political, but it's more so it is an opportunity for all of us to better understand these things. So that's a bit about our institute. Some of the work that we've been doing, we started serving HBCUs more holistically in 2020. And one of the things that we've done, we actually had the opportunity to partner with Delaware State University. And we it was really quite an honor to work with them as they acquired Wesley College. In addition, we were able to partner with the Partnership for Education Advancement, UNCF, TMCF, and Blue Meridian Partners as we served several, 50 or so publics and privates. And so we did that across dimensions of how do we improve student outcomes? And so enrollment, how do we improve graduation rates? How do we increase retention rates on campus? And so it's been a multi-year partnership. And most recently, we have had the opportunity to serve the President's Board of Advisors, as Chairman Allen said, in developing the fact base for quite a bit of the recommendation that was ultimately written by the PBA and shared to the President.
Thank you, Ms. Golden.
Yep.
Ms. Franklin, any questions from the chat or comments? Okay, what I'm hearing with respect to where we double down is really in the areas of HBCU preservation and growth, with a particular emphasis on our smaller private institutions and student supports and connected pathways, which is where we spend a lot of time trying to find additional supports for our students. To the full advisory group, that does not mean that we won't focus on research and technology, though we've made great efforts there, or infrastructure. But those are probably the places where we're going to do a little bit more work as we report to the president next year, and certainly we'll tip our hat to that in our report this year. Is there any unreadiness with those priorities as we move forward? Good. Okay. All right, I think I don't believe Dr. Baskerville is with us. I'm going to ask for her one more time. Ms. Franklin, is she in the room? Anybody from NAFIO in the room?
I don't have her signed up, sir.
Okay. Do we have any public comment?
We do.
Okay.
First, I'll have Dr. Randy Huntley from Deloitte, if you'll join us at the table. And then followed by Loretta Williams Gurnell, Supergirl Shine Foundation. You'll each have 2 minutes to provide your comments.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This has actually been a pretty spectacular conference this year. So my name is Dr. Randy Hunley. I'm with Deloitte, and we've done a number of different things with the initiative, and we're so proud to be here with several of our partners this past week. You know, amongst some of the things that we have been able to do with the HBCU community, including donating trustworthy AI books to every HBCU across the country, participating in AI roundtables, developing artificial intelligence summits to make sure the knowledge is going and upskilling the faculty and the students. We have been able to participate in PMO, the Executive HBCU Space Lab, which was noted by President Biden in his speech. And by doing so, we collaborated with industry, agency, and HBCUs to create an online collaborative platform that focuses on bringing federal opportunities and events all into one space to make it easier for HBCUs to go after. We've also created the contracting playbook to bring Contracting 101 to HBCUs at their fingertips and understand what it means to do business with the government. This week, we also launched a new strategy. So through some support with the initiative and support with UNCF, we have laid out a strategy that will bring up all HBCUs together and leave none behind. So we hear some of the comments that some of our private universities might struggle, and there's a possibility of not making it. And we see the funding in the federal government in contracting. We know there is a little bit of hesitancy for some HBCUs to join the contracting space. And so we have laid out what we call the HBCU Collaboration Hub, to ensure that there is a regional collab hub at the R2 institutions to facilitate contracting for other HBCUs as a cluster. Including in that is a number of resources that not only are we developing in prototype to provide visibility for HBCUs on what your grants and contracts and patents are, including AI-generated stakeholder outputs, and an entire digital twin of the federal ecosystem so you can play risk-free, which is free, an investment Deloitte has made and free to the institutions. We have a number of partners and agencies that are now willing to engage in an intentional level to make sure that when one HBCU gets a resource, they all get it and help elevate each and every one. As with that, our ask for the initiative is for a follow-up so we can start to form a governance plan. While Deloitte has formulated the strategy, and a shared services strategy is nothing new, we know that. But why we have started to put it together to make sure that this is actionable and we don't continue to have the same conversation on what could be, that next year we are focusing on results for the institutions. So our ask is for a follow-up for governance. We are not the owners of this. It belongs to the HBCU community. We do want to provide the correct resources.
Thank you for that. I would encourage you, and Ms. Franklin will connect you with our co-chairs in research and contracting. That is Dr. Glenda Glover and Lisa Jackson. And we'll put you all together and have that conversation. Ms. Franklin, who's next?
Loretta Williams Gurnell, Supergirls Shine Foundation.
I already like the name.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chair of the Board of Directors, our advisors, and to those members who are absent. Thank you for this opportunity to share. I am Loretta Williams Gurnell, the founder and CEO of Supergirl Shine Foundation. We are based in Houston, Texas, and our whole focus is to break the barriers and close the gaps for more women and girls in STEM college careers and workforce. I want to personally take this time to say thank you, Dr. Trent, for the invitation for this convention, or this conference, and I tell you, this has been very eye-opening and has given me more visibility to be able to work with HBCUs. As a graduate of the Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio, I am proud to say that I am the first Cornell University recipient to have a research experience from CSU, and that CSU made me into that person to be able to have that. And that's the same type of attitude that we take with our team with SGSF. Today's conversation has been a good one to be able to take back. One of the things that I want to enlighten and share with you as a participant, I've been able to either gain meetings that are already on my calendar or speak with industry on how we can have more community organizations a part of the funding. And I think that is really needs to be highlighted because we are on the boots, we're the boots on the ground. We're a great recruiting tool for HBCUs as a graduate, as well as working with the community, particularly in the Houston area with Texas Southern University, Prairie View A&M, and others that are around. One of the things that we are looking at is, since we are on the ground, how can we be the pipeline to help HBCUs increase the enrollment? One of the ways is sustainable funding. And so as we are looking at possible funding opportunities, extensions, how do we actually make sure that money is trickled down to organizations like Supergirl Shine Foundation? Because we have the parents, we have the students, we have the community. And if we can get them exposed to gain the access, then we already know there is tangible opportunities for them. So thank you again for this opportunity to come and to share with you. Continue the great work that you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing. If no one has said thank you, I say thank you because it's making a difference in our communities. And just remember, when you see a Supergirl, you come in the presence of the Supergirl, she is going to share with you how she is leading her ship through internships, mentorships, scholarships, entrepreneurships, and business ownerships. I am Loretta Williams Gurnell, the founder and CEO of Supergirl Shine Foundation, where we are changing the workforce, one Supergirl at a time.
All right.
Mr. Chair, one final comment from Hunter Walden, Prairie View A&M graduate.
I bet he is Mr. Prairie View, too.
Yes, everybody can hear me. Hello, everyone. I am Hunter Walden, and I currently serve as the 20th Mr. Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Also served as the 42nd Mr. Prairie View A&M University. I just want to say I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to take in all this knowledge, and I couldn't be more grateful for all the work and the service you do for each and every respective HBCUs. Just hearing some of the things, even like the Pell Grant, and knowing how I was affected by that personally, and how that helped me matriculate through my university, and just be in rooms like this and continue to fight and advocate for HBCUs is something that is touching. So I just wanted to make sure I express my gratitude for the work and the dedication that each and every one of you guys have to furthering our communities. So,
Could you just take a couple of minutes to tell us how the Prairie View experience has impacted your life?
I definitely feel like going to Prairie View was a opportunity for me to really get out of my shell and learn so much about myself. Being young and in my 20s, I'm honestly still learning so much about myself. But having that pivotal period of being able to have such a family-oriented community and so many opportunities to learn, to grow, to fail, to succeed. I definitely think it's an experience that anyone who has the opportunity to experience should. So,
Well, thank you, Hunter. We appreciate you.
thank you.
Keep wearing that crown, my man.
That concludes our public comment section.
Yes, can we go back? I believe Dr. Hogan wanted to make some remarks by chat.
Yes. From Dr. Beverly Wade Hogan, I want to support the comments made by Dr. Kimbrough regarding the smaller HBCUs. There are significant challenges in enrollment growth, infrastructure, including technology. It is commendable to increase the Pell Grant and other scholarship opportunities. These schools will need attentive consideration in these areas to remain competitive, survive, and thrive. Thank you for the progress with FAFSA.
All right.
And these reports will be made and have been made available via email to members of the board. Last comment is from Lisa Jackson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. She is asking to be connected with McKinsey for these great resources.
Tell Ms. Jackson they may come at a cost if she's in her Apple capacity.
She's all smiles.
All right, thank you, Board of Advisors. I have just quick concluding comments. Wonderful progress. I know I'm the chairman, but the work gets done by the team on the ground, particularly led by Dr. Dietrich Trent, but all the thought leadership in this room is critical. I can say, as you all know, that the White House Initiative was started under President Carter in 1978, and I can earnestly say that this group here has been the most aggressive in that history and time frame, and it has a lot to do with Dr. Trent and her team. To the audience, we have never had this big an audience in our time, so thank you for being here. Just so you know, we meet 4 times a year. We have a responsibility to issue a report to the president every year, which we will do our second report here shortly. I remind you that our pillars are physical and technological infrastructure, research and contracting, career services and connected pathways, and HBCU preservation and growth. I'd also like to remind you that those particular pillars are consistent with our advocacy groups, NAFIO, Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and the United Negro College Fund, all of whom Dr. Trent meets with on a quarterly basis. We meet 4 times a year here at the PBA. We have one of those meetings, at least one of those meetings every year, on a college campus. In our first year, we were at Norfolk State. Last year, we were at Alabama State. And I'm sure somebody will be vying for position in 2025 in this body as well. The meetings are always public, and I think we put them out the meeting agenda 14 days in advance. So I would encourage you to tell your colleagues, certainly come again, witness our progress, and note the interactivity. While you can't participate in the meeting itself from an interaction standpoint, you can certainly listen and take back everything you learn. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Trent for any concluding comments, and then we will motion for adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any concluding comments, so thank you very much, everybody. Safe travels.
You act like you did something this week. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, have a good day and good weekend.